Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Small Business Environmental Assistance Program webinar today. We would like to ask you to please make sure to keep your microphones muted and your cameras off so that we're saving bandwidth and giving full attention to our featured speaker from Colorado. With that said, we're going to have about a 20-minute presentation, maybe 25 minutes, and then we'll stop for questions. You are welcome to chat your question. If you hover in your lower, the frame of your screen, you will see that chat button, and you're welcome to chat your question or comments, and we will address those in about 20 or 30 minutes. So with that, we are recording this webinar today, and I want to welcome Gabe from Colorado, and Gabe will kick us off and introduce himself. So thank you so much, Gabe, for being our featured speaker today.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. So hi, everybody. If you haven't met me before, my name is Gabe Catenacci, and I'm a regulatory assistance specialist with Colorado's Department of Public Health and Environment. And I also act as Colorado's Small Business Ombudsperson. And today I'm going to be covering some of the findings from my review of the SBO and CAP. And as a preliminary disclaimer, I did have COVID last week and my voice still hasn't recovered. So I do apologize. My voice is a little shaky in spots, but I do have some tea here to kind of help combat that. But jumping into that, the motivation for why we wanted to explore these topics were the fact that we had some staff transitions in the SBO role, which gave us the opportunity to redefine what the role looked like and allowed us to create more value for the position. We also wanted to address some of the historic challenges we've seen with the CAP as it related more to its administration. And so the goals of this project were to explore the challenges, best practices, and opportunities for both the SBO and the CAP through the process of evaluating successful state programs to identify if there's any underlying themes that can be useful in a narrative setting. This project included two components, the first of which was a semi-structured interview component, and 23 representatives were interviewed, and they represent different state SBOs and SBEAPs, current and former CAP representatives, and the EPA. The second component was a survey function that was really aimed at exploring the Section 507 structural data, and there were 34 states that participated in that survey. The central themes of the SBO challenges centered around the internal and external challenges with the role, the interdivisional relationships, and the structural challenges. When comparing the structure of Section 507 programs against historic data, the most notable difference was the relationship between the SBO and the SBEAP. You'll see here data from both 1998 and from my current study, and you'll see that in 1998, 96% of programs had a separate SBO and SBEAP. This has since changed with a greater shift towards a mixed SBO and SBEAP role, with one person handling both positions, currently sitting at 42% from the survey findings. Among the locations of the SBO and SBEAPs, I don't think it's any surprise that regulatory agencies were among the most commonly reported at 73%. However, there were some unique structures with the SBO and SBEAPs being housed in the state economic agency or the county level regulatory agency. Small business development centers and universities make up the remaining portion, both of which at 8%. And it's important to note that in the survey question that asked this question, the SBO and the SBEAPs were grouped together. So that does skew the data for these states that have separate locations for both positions. But when we're talking about the location, it's important because the location of the SBO directly relates to the types of challenges that are produced from that, as we'll see in these next couple slides. The interview data produced distinct internal and external challenges for the SBO. Internal challenges related more towards organizational silos, staff changes, the re-education of these staff changes, and the enforcement perception of the voluntary component of Section 507. External challenges related more to the lack of public awareness of Section 507, the variance in sector needs, the regulatory jargon that can make it difficult for small businesses to engage with, and the public perception of the regulatory agency. Challenges like organizational silos and public perception were associated more with regulatory agencies, while programs in SBDCs or universities were not susceptible to these. Interdivisional or interagency relationships were another significant challenge identified from the interviews. In particular, balancing the relationships with enforcement and compliance teams is difficult because of the separate structure that often leads to a lack of internal knowledge of the programs. You'll see on the right here, there's a kind of mock-up of what do these silos look like in the regulatory agency, and you'll just see just vertically with the hazardous waste and air, the separation can make it difficult for the SBO or the SBEAP to interact with. In addition, the voluntary aspects of Section 507 also differ in intent from the enforcement space. And there's a lot of different cultural elements that go into those two different programs. And so some interviewees noted that this can create tension, especially when small businesses were receiving confidential support from the SBO. Some interviewees also noted the SBO performs best in an authority position because it grants more of that lateral reach within and outside the agency. However, this project found that the SBO's effectiveness is not necessarily bound by the position's authority, but rather by its ability to establish shared goals, create understanding roles and responsibilities, its awareness and connection to key contact points, and its visibility and perceived value, both internally and externally. Structural challenges were one of the most significant themes that were impacting SBO effectiveness. And the project found that the majority of programs consists of only 1 or 2 full-time equivalent employees. And with many states moving to that mixed SBO and SBEAP role, that puts additional strain on capacity, especially when you consider the fact that some SBOs and SBEAPs also have additional responsibilities, whether it's radon, pollution prevention, or other types of programmatic needs, which can make it difficult to fully invest in small businesses at times. Some interviewees expressed concern that the consolidation of Section 507 programming could have long-term effects on the program's national presence. There's also the concern around the decreased oversight and mandating Section 507 programs, as this has led to a lack of congruence in how states are operating their programs, with many, or well, not many, but some states and territories not participating in Section 507 at all. And so this really highlights the need for the development of new guidance material and support for state programs. And many interviewees expressed the desire for a consolidated state advocacy to bolster the Section 507 program. Moving into the best practices to address this, they relate closely to liaison reframing, marketing and narrative building, outreach, and building efficiency through established resources and automation. The SBO should be evaluating their program to invest in activities that create internal value, visibility, and connections. And in doing so, it's important to make distinctions in the role between the SBO and the SBEAP, because unlike the SBO is not traditionally responsible for providing direct technical assistance. While it's important for the SBO to have an understanding of the environmental compliance landscape, they're more concerned or operate better in capacities as a liaison, being able to develop internal and external partnerships, serving as a facilitator to connect small businesses to the right resources, and managing a clearinghouse of information so we can help navigate businesses through these systems. This map represents partnerships that the other states have found valuable. It consists of organizations that represent small business industries, regulatory experts, economic and licensing agencies, voluntary programs, and environmental justice communities. By managing a network of small businesses, the SBO will be able to better connect small businesses to the right contact point to maximize delivered assistance. And when we're compiling small business resources at one point, we're able to create that clearinghouse of information effect to help assist in delivering resources to small businesses. Because there's so many resources out there, both outside of your organization and inside your organization, that having one person know where everything is and be able to guide small businesses can help them navigate again through these systems to ensure that we can provide or optimize our service potential. It also frees up the SB from having to manage these relationships and allows them to focus more on providing that direct technical assistance. The SBO should be looking at how it markets its program to help increase its public image and awareness. Interviewees found that having a clear pitch of the role and services offered by the SBO is essential to influence public image. When considering how to market the SBO, efforts should focus on describing the unique space that Section 507 offers by highlighting tenets of impartiality, independence, and confidentiality, which helps separate the program from enforcement and defines the type of trust building that the SBO is trying to establish. Complementary or free language should also be incorporated into marketing efforts because economic drivers have been shown to be having a significant influence on small business behavior. SBO should also be reviewing the language or framing of the program, as even the term ombudsperson is likely not going to be understood by the small businesses. And so when interacting with businesses, SBO should be considering alternative framing, whether small business liaison or something else, to better connect with small businesses and limit that initial, well, kind of how does that relate to me discussion that small businesses face when they're faced with a word they don't necessarily understand or the type of services it offers. But reframing the position does not necessarily have to be at ends with the original language in Section 507 or the state implementation plans for that matter. Reframed roles can still operate under SBO in an official capacity to satisfy these requirements by using more relatable identifiers when actually performing the work with small businesses. Reframing programs can also involve reviewing and creating unique branding to separate the SBO from the association with enforcement, because small businesses can get a sticker shock when they see that regulatory logo on your emails or your guidance materials. And so it can potentially lead to them tuning out information that could be potentially be even useful to them. And so a good example of this practice is with our Colorado Green Business Network. You'll see they created separate branding here, and they're part of our sustainability coaching and recognition program. And this, of course, depends on the rules and policies of your agency, but it's something to consider. And lastly, the SBO should be looking at ways they can leverage small business champions by documenting small business successes in annual reports, website publications, and newsletter spotlights, developing pathways to recognize or award small business successes. And this is useful because it utilizes a small business as a marketing tool, because having a good praise for a program is going to carry much more weight when it's coming from a small business compared to when it's coming from marketing efforts from the agency or organization. The research project found that many states also saw value in SBO and outreach, as it helped market their services and allowed them to better understand the needs of the small business communities. To develop a robust outreach component, the SBO should be looking to define outreach at an industry-specific level. And so small businesses, they represent a wide array of different needs and different industries. And so creating a tailored approach that uses not only the format, whether it's listservs or webinars, but also the time availability that they can actually participate in these events, can help maximize stakeholder involvement. Outreach is often best conducted through partnerships that carry trust, as again, SBOs housed in the regulatory agencies are going to have likely that negative association with enforcement that they have to overcome. And so using or leveraging partnerships with trade associations or chambers of commerce can help create more meaningful engagement, as they already have access to a small business base and have established trust with their constituents. When possible, the SBO should also be partnering with their organization's environmental justice team to help better connect it to relevant resources, whether it's translation services or other types of tools to help enhance the resource accessibility for small businesses or stakeholders from DI communities. And there are a lot of opportunities to utilize already established resources for environmental justice and to assess how we're conducting outreach and services. I have a mock map here on the right that uses CDPHE's EnviroScreen tool, which is really similar to the EPA EJ Screen tool, to simulate how we can compare assistance data against the environmental justice variables. And by using zip codes from site visits or collecting them through email or phone assistance, we can still provide that level of confidentiality while allowing us to collect valuable location data. Both EnviroScreen and EJ Screen allow you to create a layer or overlay the data against the EJ variables, which over time would allow us to track which communities we're operating well in or which ones we may need to re-engage in. And this can be a really helpful tool to ensure that we are promoting equitability in our programs. With capacity being a challenge for many programs, the SBO should be utilizing established resources and incorporating automation whenever possible to deliver greater services while managing time constraints. There are many small business resources out there for SBOs, and there's no reason that we need to be reinventing the wheel with every project. And so using existing resources can help inform or support new activities with far less staff involvement from starting from scratch. Some examples of this include utilizing existing small business data so you don't have to conduct your own research. Some good tools, whether it's the census and non-employer statistics, are free resources that allow you to identify the number of small businesses by NAICS or SIC code, while also filtering by employee size. There's also software such as Data Axle and Mergent Intellect, which provide small business contact information by SIC or NAICS code. And these are often available through public library systems. So they can be a great opportunity for a great no-cost opportunity for Section 507 programs. And leveraging partnerships like the Secretary of State was also useful from the interview data, as it helps create early engagement with new businesses as they get their business licenses. There's also tools such as the Flesh Reading Ease, which is a Microsoft Word tool that reviews your guidance and language in your documents and assigns a grade level to it to ensure that our resources are going to be understandable for the layperson. Automation projects can also be very useful because it allows you to provide assistance without having that direct staff involvement. So it allows you to maximize tasks by freeing up times that require kind of administration and allow you to focus more on analysis. Automation projects can vary quite a bit. They can range from data and reporting management to reduce time on data collection and allow you to focus more on that data analysis piece. Streamline outreach through newsletters or small business partnerships, the development of regulatory assistance tools like chatbots or Ohio's Permit Wizard, and exploring the implementation of AI platforms and resource development. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but just a way to kind of get the wheel started on what existing resource and automation can mean for the SBO position. Moving on to the CAP section. The CAP challenges varied a little bit differently, with central themes more relating to the appointment structure, quality of appointments, the capacity imbalance, and the difficulty in adhering to original statute and guidance. There's been a significant decline in CAPs, which I think many states and the National SBEAP is aware of, but it's more stark when you kind of see it illustrated here. And from 1998, there were 45 CAPs, but this research project identified only 15 CAPs that are currently existing from other state programs. The EPA is aware of this and has documented similar findings in a 2011 and 2012 review of the Section 507 program. And you'll see all of the CAPs mapped out on the right here. But I wanted to provide an additional distinction in this research project, and that is defining between active versus passive CAPs. Active CAPs are those that are meeting 4 or more times per year, and passive CAPs are those meeting 0 to 3 times per year. I wanted to make this distinction because the amount of times the CAP is meeting can directly relate to the amount of service it can provide for small businesses. And this is not to say that passive CAPs don't provide value, because they certainly can, especially when you're at that 3 mark, because the 3 and 4 isn't really that big of a difference. But when you're comparing a CAP that's meeting 0 times a year versus one that's meeting monthly, the types of services that are actually being provided for small businesses is going to be much different. And you'll see on the right here, there's really only 5 CAPs that meet this active definition, with 10 of the remaining being passive CAPs. There are a handful of states that didn't participate in the survey, and you'll see that by the hashed out mark there. But when meeting with the National Steering Committee, it's not expected that even having this data would impact this data at all really significantly. CAP structural challenges were almost universal across all states interviewed, contributing to difficulties in maintaining CAP and being cited as reasons for no longer having one. The most prominent theme was the CAP's rigid appointment structure, in particular with the difficulty to secure legislative appointments. This was a reoccurring theme from interviews, that the CAP administrator, which is often the SBO or the SBEAP, was stuck kind of in a limbo waiting for appointments because they couldn't get in contact with the legislator or the governor to actually make these appointments. Term limits were also an issue that kind of compounded the appointment structure, in that once a term was up, they would have to go through this whole rigorous process again, which oftentimes was not really fruitful. Another prominent theme was the quality of appointments. that made it difficult to identify a candidate with the three necessary pieces to become a functioning member of the CAP. And those are knowledge of the environmental regulations, being acquainted with small business needs, and willingness to participate. Many states emphasize this last piece of willingness to participate because the CAP is a voluntary position, and so they often had times promoting participation from CAP members that were appointed. And the last structural theme relates to the capacity imbalance. And the first is that CAP members oftentimes outnumber the SBEAP. As I pointed out earlier, many SBEAPs consist of only 1 or 2 individuals, whereas a CAP can consist of up to 7 individuals. And so you kind of have this 7 people telling 2 how to operate. And then when you consider the fact that it's much easier to identify a problem than it is to create a solution or implement a solution, the SBEAPs also face additional strain from their CAPs, which led to tension being created. There's also important to emphasize that the structure itself creates a high demand for the voluntary components of the CAP, the members themselves, because they are dedicating free time to the advancement of the Section 507 program. And lastly, there's to consider the burden for the CAP administrator, which relates more to facilitating the meetings, creating meeting notes, managing the appointments, and a lot of time gets dedicated to those services. Many interviewees noted the needs for the CAP may have changed since Section 507's inception in 1990. And it's important because in 1990, the CAP filled a necessary void to help engage with small businesses. But the way in which we communicate and how small businesses operate has changed significantly since then. And so some interviewees expressed the lack of updates has fixed the SBO function of the CAP to perform a role that is no longer necessary in some cases. And so having updated guidance can help the state Section 507 programs adapt to this current environment. To address some of these challenges, the interview data suggested looking at structural alternatives, fostering CAP ownership, and re-envisioning the CAP duties. Some states have pursued unique pathways to address the CAP's rigid appointment structure. And here are 3 alternatives that were identified from the interviews. The first is a recommendation with deadline approach, where the CAP administrator would recommend a candidate with small business and regulatory knowledge and establish a deadline for consideration. If the governor or legislator did not respond within that set deadline, that would grant tacit approval to the candidate. And on the other hand, the governor or legislator would have the opportunity to promote a alternative candidate as long as that is within the deadline. And this scenario addresses 2 topics or has 2 main benefits. First of which is that the CAP administrator is able to recommend candidates who already have the pre-existing experience necessary to become a functioning CAP member at the start of it. So they don't require the same level of training or time to get up to speed. The second of which is that it establishes a tangible timeline to actually receive a CAP appointment, whether it's through the tacit approval or a alternative appointment. And so this allows the CAP administrator to not kind of be stuck in that limbo waiting for an appointment. The second scenario was created from one state in particular and is a voluntary CAP. And in this scenario, the state created a voluntary body that resided outside of Section 507. And so they still have the traditional CAP with its traditional CAP appointment structure coming from the governor, the legislators, as well as the executive director of the regulatory agency. But because they're able to have this voluntary component outside of Section 507, they're able to staff it with members that have that experience, utilizing members from trade associations that have subject matter expertise, or utilizing regulatory experts from their organization that can kind of speak to more the fine-tuned components of the regulations. Some unique features of this scenario are that the voluntary CAP was able to share some of the CAP duties with the traditional CAP, and so they were able to offset some of that burden and allow it to tackle more robust topics, and as well as they're able to provide some of that education and training to support the continuity of services when the CAP isn't fully staffed or isn't performing to the requirements of the program. The last scenario here is cap removal, which of course kind of brings up the question of how can you remove a cap with Section 507 being in Section 507E being in action. And to answer this, the research project also interviewed with the EPA, and it was found that the EPA's legal team did a review of Section 507 to identify the state's responsibilities. And their legal analysis created a new interpretation from the original reading, in that the Section 507A outlines these SIP requirements, which only really relate to the creation of a technical assistance program and the designation of a budget person. The creation of a cap is outside of those Section 507A SIP requirements under Section 507E. And so the EPA legal team is maintaining, because it's outside of those SIP requirements, it is therefore severable from the program in some case, severable from the program. And so the fact that Congress had that separation, the EPA has given the approval to remove the cap, even though it does place weight on the fact that the cap is still a valuable piece of the Section 507 program. And so the implication of this new interpretation is that if states are no longer required to follow the Section 507E language, which is a barrier with deployment structure, they could rebuild a more implementable alternative that achieves the same purpose of the cap, or reallocate administrative time to tasks that produce more direct value for small businesses. The EPA has formalized this opinion or this interpretation with New Mexico SIP provision, citing this same justification. To enhance the quality of appointments, many interviewees recommended creating structures to foster cap ownership, and developing robust onboarding materials can help train new candidates or relevant environmental regulations, and educate them on small business sectors that they may not be familiar with. A clear onboarding plan can help take off some of the weight from the SBO or the CAP administrator to continually train new candidates. Bylaws, MOUs, or other similarly signed agreements for the CAP could also help outline some of the expectations of the position and provide more accountability if the candidate's not meeting them. And clearly defining metrics to evaluate the CAP members can help track and measure participation and CAP effectiveness to inform CAP dismissals in cases where members are routinely falling short. Creating CAP chairs or leadership positions and filling them with candidates who already have or support Section 507's mission and have the necessary experience can help give the CAP greater direction with less direct support from the SBO. And lastly, it's important to define what are those administrative responsibilities between the SBO and the CAP chairs, because the goal should be to try to shift the CAP away from requiring hand-holding from the SBO or the SBEAP and kind of encourage greater independent management. Since we are tied to some of the data guidance and language from Section 507, states wanting to improve their CAP should be looking at ways to invest in activities that go beyond the traditional duties or language in Section 507. Some interviewees suggested pursuing small business advocacy in a way that the CAP has traditionally not performed. The CAP could be creating advocacy for small businesses directly within the regulatory agency, which could be beneficial because they're positioned outside of the agency, and because they're made from legislative appointments. The CAP members could also be better acquainted or have better connections to lobby or advocate at the policy level in ways that employees of the regulatory agency are often prohibited in participating in. To deal with the capacity imbalance between the CAP and the SBEAP, the CAP should be creating value by performing tasks that directly support the SBEAP rather than just reviewing its efficiency or providing that oversight role, whether it's assisting with outreach efforts, interpreting survey findings, facilitating regular involvement with the environmental regulatory divisions. These are all ways the CAP can create direct value instead of just being that body that sits outside the SBEAP and telling them what to do, which again creates some of that tension. And the CAP should also be structured in a way that minimizes the need for continuous SBO and SBEAP involvement by assigning tasks and to perform outside of meetings. And of course, this is obviously easier said than done, but revamping the CAP appointment structure and looking at ways to foster CAP ownership or putting up these additional people in leadership roles and assigning chairs and looking beyond the tasks traditionally assigned by the CAP are all different types of ways that you can revitalize what the CAP does and how it operates to hopefully allow the CAP to function more independently outside of that traditional SBO or SBEAP administrator role. Lastly, I wanted to outline some of the limitations of this project. First of which is the fact that this project was conducted through the lens of Colorado's needs. And it's important to bring this up because differences among states can affect the applicability of the challenges, best practices, and opportunities. I think one of the main truths from this project is that states are operating so differently from one to the next. They have varying levels of needs, and so it's important to kind of take that in when you're looking at these findings, identify what could potentially work for your state. And lastly, the piece is that because this was a research project kind of done by myself, I did have other duties as well, and so we didn't have the capacity to fully engage in more of an academic formal study. And so it did lack some of that third-party coding review that's usually indicative of transcript analysis. And so there are some biases that can be introduced by just having one person review and kind of define all the themes. And so with that, I'd be happy to move into questions and answers, but I wanted to thank everybody who participated in the project, those of you who were interviewed or responded to the survey, because I think this highlights some of the main benefit in my mind of the National SBEAP, which is information sharing. All the findings from this project were based upon what other states are doing. I think it's really important to have kind of open borders between the states in terms of how we're sharing data and how we're sharing practices to ensure that we can help each other grow as small business needs change.
All right. Well said, Gabe. That's what we're all about, is sharing these resources so that people do not have to reinvent the wheel, or we're able to find what works best in their state because we are so uniquely different. Important information.
Nancy, you're breaking up.
There are a few questions in the chat, and like those.
Hey, Nancy, you're breaking up a little.
Okay, thank you. So Julie has a question. Is it all right with you?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, Julie.
Hey, yeah, I'm an old timer here. I've been in from Maine. But this was Gabe, you did an awesome job. Honestly, it's probably one of the best presentations I've been to for a while. So 100% really good. And I love the fact that this was kind of presented as, there's not one shoe that fits each state. And we did have a cap for many years. I think it's really important that I think the study's great. I think what you presented is great, and you really didn't leave anything unturned as far as anything I might be concerned on where this goes or who looks at it or so forth. The cap, as you mentioned, has been very difficult. I had a very active cap for years, and then COVID and so forth. There's been a lot of, like you mentioned, different replacements on it too. And I just want to make sure that as we discuss this, or you folks discuss it further on, that there are many ways around the barn to have things reviewed. And some folks, like our state, has a board of environmental protection, and we have another service, and we have sector associations. So what I used to get from CAP, I get probably 10 times more from different methods that I use today. And then the other thing that wasn't mentioned, but it's because the survey was done prior to, is that I think we're seeing, especially in the Northeast, and I imagine in many other regions, is that we're really having a difficult time at the Department of Environmental Protection, just really hiring and getting, folks in our program. So we have quite a few like really hot button issues, and we've been hiring. So the small business assistance programs are really important. And if there's just one of you, there's so many ways to partner throughout your agency to make sure more folks are doing assistance. But I think those were the two things that I just really wanted to mention. And if anybody has any questions for Maine, you can email me or so forth. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. And I think you will notice that Maine did have the cap highlighted in the cap slide there. And that was kind of the one caveat I had. I didn't have a chance to mention it, but I still had it highlighted because even though Maine doesn't traditionally have a cap, and in our conversations we had, you did point out the environmental boards that kind of supplement the cap. And so I wanted to kind of call that as well, because if you're able to create a system that's still providing the same type of value that the cap traditionally would in a more meaningful way, I think that still addresses the intent of the cap in some ways. And like I said, New Mexico was one of the states that had formally removed their cap. And so if states are looking to pursue that pathway, I would definitely recommend looking at the types of existing environmental boards that your organization or regulatory agency already has, because they are already active. And so you already have a group of subject matter expertise that are currently situated to potentially take on that review portion from the cap. And I see there was a question from Olivia. How many of the SBEAPs are air media specific? I will say I didn't explicitly ask this question in the project, but every single individual that I interviewed had expressed the fact they offer multimedia systems. And so I think that while it is an air-based program and that is coming from the Clean Air Act, the vast majority of states are offering some type of multimedia assistance. And in Colorado, Kayla Urso, who is the manager for our small business assistance program, she can talk more on it if you'd like, but we do provide an air quality focus while also having sustainability and multimedia as more of a secondary approach. And yes, Paul, I'd be happy to share the presentation slides. Second question, did you do an active SBO, SBEAP map similar to the CAP map? So no, I did not provide a map on which states currently have an active program or not. And the reasons I didn't do that, I considered it initially, but this project, the intent of this project was initially to share resources. I didn't really want to necessarily point out which states weren't performing well. I wanted more to identify best practices from the states that are really active, and so that was the main intent from the project. So I didn't really separate it and create a separate map for which states actually have SBO or SBEAPs and which ones don't. Yes, go ahead, Matt.
Hey, Gabe, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, great presentation. That was really insightful. And I apologize if you touched on this. I got pulled away for a minute, but I was curious, in the states that do have active caps, what does the content of those meetings look like? Is that something that you kind of dove into? Here in Tennessee, we do have a cap, and we've tended more recently to use it as a platform for providing updates and getting feedback on resources. But I'm not certain that that's the best use of those individuals skill sets and connections for us. So I'm just curious, what are those best practices in terms of leveraging active CAP members, and kind of what do those meetings look like, if you have any insight on that?
Yes, I don't have kind of the specifics on what was actually addressed during those meetings. I will say, kind of anecdotally from what I saw from the interviews, the states that did have the really active caps, the first ones that come to my mind, obviously, are Tennessee and California. They were really using their cap in a way that was targeting the policy level. And so using the cap as a way to kind of encourage policy change, I think, is a more meaningful task than just having that oversight role for the SBO or the SBEAP. And so these states were trying to leverage some of the more experience from these legislative appointments in something that could be more tangible for the program or small businesses for that matter. But I'm not sure. I don't have a really concise answer for you, Matt, outside of that, unfortunately.
No, that's great. I appreciate it.
And Tony, were you surprised by anything in particular? A couple, I think, initial surprises. I mean, I am very new to the position, so pretty much anything that surprised me. When I initially started this project, I was only a month and a half or 2 months into my role last September. And I was shocked to see, one, how few caps there were across the country, and two, the fact that there's many states that are operating off this 1 or 2 FTE equivalent role, or even less in some scenarios. And I think it's shocking for me because small businesses represent such a wide stakeholder base. I mean, in Colorado, small businesses make up 98.6% of all of our businesses across the state. And so with having such a large, but consisting such a large component of our business population, it's shocking that 1 or 2 people is responsible for meeting the needs of all these, because again, all these needs differ so much. And so I do put my hats off to some of you who have more expertise. I know Tony has done a lot of work in North Carolina to help small businesses. And so those are my kind of main takeaways.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. There's no hands raised. And so with that, we want to thank you very much and thank everyone for participating today. And as we said in the chat, we will have this recording posted to our YouTube site, and we will send out the link in Friday Feature next week. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.